Today is August 11th, 2024. As the conflict in Ukraine continues, we are hearing about Ukraine's gradual retreat along the line of contact, the crumbling of their fighting capacity, growing manpower shortage, and a continuous enduring shortage of arms and ammunition. Amid all of this, Ukraine decided to take some of its best units off the line of contact that they are incapable of holding and sent them on an incursion into Kursk, Russia. This is inside pre-2014 Russian borders. Indisputably internationally recognized Russian territory. And this is the first time the Ukrainian government has openly done this. They had done this before in Belgorod, but they had claimed at the time that these were militant groups separate from the Ukrainian government, even though they were using Ukrainian military equipment and also American military equipment. So it was obviously a Ukrainian government operation, but they were attempting to maintain some sort of plausible deniability. In this case, they're not even trying to do that. They are just openly sending their forces into Kursk. Let's take a look at the battlefield. This is via liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian live map. Keep that in mind as we look at it. And as I've been pointing out every single week, Russian forces continue to advance along the entire line of contact, including right now. You can see all these red rifle icons. This is where Russian forces are pushing. You can see it extends along the entirety of the line of contact from west of Donetsk and Avdiivka into New York. There's a Ukrainian town called New York. They're advancing towards Torsk. They are moving into Chasiv Yar, west of Bakhmut. They are encircling Seversk. They continue advancing on Kupiansk in Kharkov. They also have this new front that they had opened up in Kharkov. The point of opening that new front was to overextend Ukrainian forces. And the Ukrainian military itself admitted that they do not have enough troops to hold the line of contact in the Donbas region and also stop the advance of Russian forces in Kharkov. But now they've taken brigades worth of manpower and equipment and sent it into Kursk. Let's take a look at that on the map. So this was the new front that Russian forces opened up in Kharkov. This is the incursion, the Ukrainian incursion. And even though it looks like they've entered into and are holding all of this territory, what even Ukrainian sources are admitting is that they rushed along roads. There is a Ukrainian troop presence spread out in this area, but they do not hold it. They have not consolidated control over it, at least not yet. It is unlikely they will do so. How can they do so? If they do not have the ability to hold their own territory along the line of contact, how are they going to be able to hold this territory inside what is indisputably Russian territory? Now, people have said Russia overstretched Ukrainian troops by opening up the Kharkov front. Why can't it be a good idea for Ukraine to overextend Russian troops by opening up a front in Kursk? The reason it makes absolutely no sense is because Russia has extra troops to open new fronts. As they are grinding down Ukrainian forces, they are expanding their own military power. They have more troops constantly coming in, adding to the forces that are already there. Ukraine cannot even replace the troops that it is losing along the line of contact. They have no troops to spare. They are incapable of opening a new front and somehow extending Russian forces. Russia has forces they could commit to Kursk while maintaining the same troop levels elsewhere along the line of contact. Ukraine cannot do that. So it makes absolutely no sense strategically or even tactically. This, in the long run, is going to accelerate the collapse of Ukraine's fighting capacity. Now, people are asking, well, why did they do this? Is this an attempt to seize and hold territory and have a bargaining chip with Russia when negotiations begin? Now, I highly suggest people follow several sources who do almost daily updates on the conflict in Ukraine. I do a weekly update. These sources do daily updates. The Duran, Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mikuras, Mark Sloboda does at least 2 or 3 long format interviews a week, especially focused on Ukraine, and Scott of Calibrated is doing daily updates on Telegram. He also does videos weekly. Alexander Mercouris made the point that Russia will not even begin negotiations if even a single millimeter of Russian territory is under Ukrainian control. And I think that he is absolutely right about that. Alexander Mercouris also floated the idea of these Ukrainian troops possibly trying to threaten the Kursk nuclear power plant and a nuclear weapons facility in the area. Now, everything about Ukraine's war with Russia is designed specifically to raise the costs, punish and cost Russia as much as possible. I've gone over this many times. This is the 2019 Rand Corporation paper titled Extending Russia Competing from Advantageous Ground. This is under a chapter called Providing Lethal Aid to Ukraine. And among the risks of this policy of drawing Russia into a costly conflict in Ukraine is the fact that it could produce disproportionately large Ukrainian casualties, territorial losses, refugee flows, and even lead Ukraine into a disadvantageous peace. In other words, the US strategy of using Ukraine to trigger a proxy war with Russia in the hopes that it'll draw Russia in, cost Russia tremendously, possibly extend it, overextend it, even collapse the Russian Federation. This was being done knowingly at the cost of Ukraine's existence. This is not a war to defend Ukraine. This is a war to overextend Russia at the expense of Ukraine. That is what is happening. This incursion into Kursk is not going to help defend Ukraine. In fact, it will accelerate the collapse of Ukrainian fighting capacity. But this course of action is going to cost Russia more politically and militarily than if Ukraine just continued collapsing and retreating along the line of contact at its current pace. And even though that pace will now accelerate because of this incursion into Kursk, the cost has been raised further for Russia. So from Washington's point of view, this is a success. This was the whole point of this proxy war. If Ukrainian forces are attempting to threaten or compromise Kursk nuclear power plant or nuclear weapon facilities in the area, this would also significantly increase the cost to Russia. What is the Western media saying about this incursion into Kursk? Let's start with this CNN article. Russia says Ukrainian troops crossed into its territory and launched massive attacks. So this was August 7th, the day after the incursion began, and the Western media was pretending as if maybe Russia is imagining this. Russia has accused Ukrainian troops of crossing the border to its Kursk region, which, if confirmed, marks the first incursion of its kind from Ukraine and puts pressure on Moscow in an area largely unaffected by the 2-year war. Now, of course, again, Ukraine has been doing this in Belgorod for months and months now. For the last year, they have been doing incursions like this into Belgorod. They made the ridiculous claim that it wasn't them. It was a separate militant organization. It was a resistance movement within Russia, but they were using Ukrainian military vehicles with Ukrainian markings on them, including US military equipment transferred to Ukraine. So it was obviously a Ukrainian operation. What CNN should have said, if it was engaged in journalism and not propaganda, is that this is the first time Ukraine is admitting that it is doing this. CNN also says it is unclear why Ukrainian forces would launch an attack of the scale described by Russian authorities. Ukrainian troops have found themselves under increased pressure along the 600-mile front line as Moscow continues its slow, grinding offensive, so it could be an attempt to divert Russian resources elsewhere. Given the spat of more negative developments from the front line, the news of a successful incursion helped Kiev boost the morale of its troops and civilian population. So it is possible that this could be to boost morale, a PR stunt to boost morale, but it is extremely costly. And again, it's going to actually accelerate the defeat of Ukraine, which is what is gnawing away at Ukrainian morale in the first place. We also have this article from Kiev Independent, which is much less ambiguous about what is happening. It says, Ukraine's unprecedented attack on Kursk Oblast brings war back to Russian soil. And this is obviously being reported from the public relations angle. In a rare example of maneuver operations at this stage of the war, Ukraine reportedly managed to advance up to 15 kilometers into Russia's Kursk Oblast. Now, again, Russian defenses in this area were weak, and this is why it was picked. This is at least one reason why it was picked for this type of incursion. The idea of bringing the war to Russian soil, this is an idea that those in Kiev have been toying with over the last 2+ years. The idea of drone attacks in Moscow, we remember the whole point of that was meant to try to terrorize the Russian population. But what they were finding through Western polling, actually, was that Russian people were simply being galvanized and unifying behind Moscow and demanding greater pressure put on Ukraine, greater measures taken to fight and win the war. So this is only going to have the exact opposite effect in terms of trying to affect the morale and psychology of the Russian population. I think that has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt at this point. The only reason Russian people will be upset with Moscow is because they believe Moscow is not fighting hard enough. If Moscow were to try to placate this growing sentiment, all it would mean is a more aggressive attack from Russia against Ukraine. It's not going to benefit Ukraine in any shape, form, or way. It will only make it worse, as has, again, been demonstrated over and over again over the last 2+ years. Now, Kiev Independent has this, let's look at this again. In a rare example of maneuver operations at this stage of the war. Why is it rare at this stage of the war? Because Ukraine's military has been so badly damaged, has deteriorated so much, is in such shambles that its ability to conduct an operation like this is hard to believe. This is them taking what resources they have left and throwing it into this incursion, which again is almost certainly only going to accelerate the collapse of Ukraine's fighting capacity. Kiev Independent also says the attack comes at a tumultuous stage in the war as hundreds of kilometers to the south overstretched Ukrainian brigades. This is Ukrainian media platform in Ukraine admitting how overstretched Ukrainian forces are. So overstretched Ukrainian brigades continue a desperate defense against relentless Russian attacks on multiple sectors of the front line in Donetsk Oblast. This, combined with the little tangible gains of Ukraine's previous raids into Russia, has raised questions about whether the resources committed and potential losses suffered by Kiev in the incursion will ultimately be justified by its possible strategic achievements. There are no strategic achievements to be had with this incursion. As I have explained, this benefits Washington because it raises the cost for Russia. It raises the cost in a way that Ukraine maintaining its defenses and trying to draw this out for as long as possible would not have. We have to remember that as Russia is grinding the Ukrainian military down along the line of contact, they continue attacking deep behind the line of contact. They are destroying the electric grid. They are targeting the military industrial base of Ukraine, training centers, troop assembly areas. They have significantly worn down Ukrainian air defenses. This is a huge problem the collective West cannot solve. They do not make enough of these type of weapon systems or the ammunition for them to continue supplying to Ukraine at the levels they require. This Kiev Independent article cites Rob Lee. He's one of these so-called experts in these US government corporate funded think tanks. And this is what the Kiev Independent would say. Ultimately, the question is, can Ukraine translate tactical successes into future gains, said Lee. That's possible, but when you look at what happened in May 2023, that operation was tactically successful, and I think it was an effective kind of economy of force operation, but it didn't really draw many Russian units away from the front line. Again, this goes back to the reality that Russia has enough manpower. They do not have a manpower shortage. They have enough manpower to maintain levels across the entire line of contact. Plus, they have manpower to spare, to mobilize, and send to Kursk to neutralize this incursion. So no, it is not going to, in any shape, form, or way, go from this temporary tactical success, if you could even call it that, and translate it into some sort of strategic gain. And just to give you an idea of just how bad it was before Ukraine launched this incursion, let's look at this Economist article. This was put out, surely written before the incursion began. It was published on August 6, 2024. Russia's bloody summer offensive is hurting Ukraine. Kremlin troops are making gains in the Donbas region. And if you have been following my updates over the last several weeks, it has been a constant and growing torrent of articles, headlines, commentary, and conclusions drawn by the Western media itself, Western experts, commentators, military leaders, politicians, that Ukraine is losing this war. The Economist says Russia's summer offensive, unlike Ukraine's counter-offensive last year, the 2023 Ukrainian offensive, which completely failed and cost them brigades worth of manpower and equipment. They're saying the Russian summer offensive was never announced because it really isn't an offensive. It is a war of attrition. It is Russia grinding down Ukraine along the entire line of contact. It is finally reaching critical mass where we are now seeing territorial gains result from grinding down Ukrainian forces. Russia is not trying to seize territory. They're grinding Ukrainian forces down, and as they fall apart and fall back, Russia is advancing and taking the territory. Its most intense phase has been going on in the Donbas region and Kharkov province for 3 months now. Beset by a shortage of weapons and men, Ukraine has steadily lost ground since falling back from Avdiivka in February. A village here, a bungled rotation there. It is now retreating up to 1 kilometer a day. Fighting has intensified all along the front line. On July 30th, President Volodymyr Zelensky said Pokrovsk, a town of 60,000 people before the war, had become Russia's main target. The article also says a Ukrainian security source based in Pokrovsk attributes much of the downturn to a devastating holdup of weapons by the US Congress earlier this year. And I've already explained how even before that holdup, there was a decline in the amount and quality of weapons and ammunition the entire West could send Ukraine because their stockpiles were just not that large. Their military industrial output is not large enough. But the most pressing current problem is manpower and the failure of Ukraine's mobilization program. Russia has more men. Morale in the Ukrainian ranks has dropped accordingly, he said, though the extent varies wildly depending on the brigade. There are some brigades where work is well organized, others where, frankly, it is not. At one extreme, brigades like the 3rd Assault Brigade, so this is neo-Nazis, the Azov Nazi Brigade, 3rd Assault Brigade, now based further north around Izium, even have reserves to draw on. But 3 years of attritional warfare can wear down even the best units. A commander of the 24th Brigade recently transferred from New York to Chasiv Yar, 2 of the hottest sections of the front, says battalions in his brigade are now fighting with just 20 people in position. A battalion is supposed to be around 1,000 men, is now down to 20. This is less than the size of a platoon, which is usually around 30 people. He asks to remain anonymous to express his anguish in full. He says, "Call me Syrsky," his voice laced with anger towards Alexander Syrsky, Ukraine's commander-in-chief. Does that situation described by the Economist on the eve of this incursion into Kursk, does that sound like a military capable of sparing manpower and equipment for some PR stunt into Russian territory that is almost certainly going to be squashed, just like all the other incursions Ukraine has launched into what is indisputably internationally recognized Russian territory, even recognized by Washington, London, and Brussels as Russian territory. Doesn't sound like it to me. It sounds like another example of Ukraine, its policy, which is Washington's policy of fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian, indifferent to what it will actually cost Ukraine as a nation state in the future, the near future, the very near future, I would say. So there's an additional US military assistance package to Ukraine. This is dated August 9th, 2024. Biden administration announces additional security assistance for Ukraine. You can see the list here. As has been the case month to month, it is the same items over and over again because the US does not have stockpiles of these to spare for Ukraine. They are drawing from monthly production. So we are going to see the same items over and over again. I've covered all of these before. The only thing that seems to be new on this list is multi-mission radars, and they're referring to counter-battery radars. These are radars that are used to detect enemy artillery fire. They provide the location to friendly artillery units who then return fire at the location of those enemy artillery units. The problem is these take a long time to build. The US doesn't have a lot of them to spare. They've been sending them to Ukraine in very small numbers, single-digit numbers, and they're a favorite target of Russian kamikaze drones. They find and hit these regularly. They just simply cannot keep up with it. And even if they did have enough counter-battery radars, they certainly don't have enough artillery shells, or artillery systems to fire the shells to make use of this information anyway. And of course, Russia has its own counter-battery radars. This is not a capability that Ukraine somehow has that Russia doesn't have in much greater volumes. So it's important to keep an eye on these military assistance packages, but this one, again, is just a repeat of what I covered in a previous update. These are all systems that are being provided in small numbers, not anywhere near what Ukraine requires on the battlefield, and this is another contributing factor to why we watch Ukraine's forces fall back from the line of contact day after day now, town and city after town and city. Now here is another example of Ukraine engaged in self-destructive behavior, this time on the continent of Africa. It's fighting this war for survival, supposedly in Eastern Europe, where it is actually located on the map. But for some reason, they are claiming they're also involved in Africa. So we have this article from the BBC. Niger cuts diplomatic ties with Ukraine. And so there was regime change in Niger and several other nations in the Sahel region. These are actually regime change operations taking place to remove Western-backed client regimes. And Russia is in these countries to help stabilize them. The United States, European allies maintain networks of terrorists across North Africa, the Sahel, and elsewhere, specifically to both destabilize these countries and create a pretext for the perpetual presence of Western troops all across Africa. And of course, ultimately, this is to keep Russia and China out. They want to maintain Africa as a neo-colonial holding. They do not want Russia and China coming in and developing the continent and making the continent strong enough to push the US and Europe out and keep them out. But this is what is happening. So what happened in Niger? Niger has cut diplomatic ties with Ukraine, a move which signals a burgeoning rift between some West African states and Kiev. Niger's military government said it made the move in solidarity with neighboring Mali, who severed their own relations with Ukraine 2 days ago. Both countries cited comments by a Ukrainian military official who suggested Kiev played a role in the killing of dozens of Malian soldiers last month. Ukraine has been trying to win allies in Africa throughout its war with Russia, likely in an attempt to counter Moscow's growing influence on the continent. Now, this follows the ambush of Wagner forces, Russian Wagner forces, Ukraine was bragging about their role in an attack that killed these Wagner forces. These Wagner forces were working side by side with government forces of Mali, which means if Ukraine was involved in killing Wagner forces, they were also involved in killing the government troops of Mali. So now you can see why Mali would want to cut ties with Ukraine and why Niger in solidarity would be compelled to do so as well. So the BBC elaborates, says, after Wagner confirmed losses in July's attack, so this happened last month, Andrei Yusov, a spokesman for Ukrainian military intelligence, said the rebels received the necessary information they needed to conduct the attacks. He did not elaborate. In response to Mr. Yusov's comment, Mali accused Ukraine of violating its sovereignty and announced it was breaking off relations with Ukraine with immediate effect. Niger followed suit on Tuesday, with government spokesmen calling Mr. Yusov's remarks unacceptable. Mali's neighbor Senegal also rebuked Ukraine. Over the weekend, Senegal's foreign minister summoned Ukraine's ambassador, accusing him of supporting July's attack in Mali in a since deleted video posted on the Ukrainian embassy's Facebook account. Ukraine's foreign ministry has not yet commented on Niger's decision to sever diplomatic ties. However, it called Mali's decision short-sighted and hasty and said Ukraine unconditionally complies with international law and accused Russian-controlled outfits of numerous war crimes in African countries. And this just reflects the continued immature, self-destructive policies and actions of the client regime in Kiev. This is what they have been doing from 2014 onward, but that was as designed. The United States is not trying to build Ukraine up. It transformed it into a battering ram to be fully used and consumed in war against Russia. And the United States clearly benefits by fighting Russian forces anywhere they are in the world, including in Africa. And if they can use Ukraine as an intermediary, maintain plausible deniability, this fits in with a key component of all Western and especially U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. does the exact same thing in the Middle East, using Israel as an intermediary to maintain plausible deniability. And they bolster this by claiming they've told Israel or Ukraine or whichever proxy it happens to be, we told them to show restraint, and they did this on their own. We have nothing to do with it, although the resulting outcome clearly benefits us above all others. It's interesting that Ukraine is accusing Mali's decision of being short-sighted and hasty, but no one in Ukraine's government thought posting statements taking responsibility for an attack on Mali government troops, that wasn't short-sighted or hasty or irresponsible or an egregious breach of international rules, norms, and even laws. So again, just more of the same. Now think about Ukraine somehow being involved in attacking Wagner forces in the Sahel in Africa, West Africa. This has no impact tactically or strategically along the line of contact or amid the wider conflict Ukraine is having with Russia. So again, it just every action Ukraine takes just reinforces this overall theme of Ukraine being used to advance U.S. foreign policy objectives, not just in Eastern Europe, but around the globe at Ukraine's own expense. So that's where we are with Ukraine. This is the warning to the world of the price paid for being a proxy of the United States. The island province of Taiwan, the Southeast Asian nation of the Philippines. Take note, this is your future if you allow the United States to politically capture you, your administration, your government, your people, your resources, your military. This is what the US is going to use it for at your full expense for their own benefits. I will keep an eye on the conflict in Ukraine, as always, as well as all the other wars and proxy wars the US is either in the middle of or attempting to precipitate. All of it is connected to a singular foreign policy of containing, eliminating all peer and near peer competitors and maintaining US primacy, hegemony across the entire planet. That is how all of these conflicts are ultimately connected, from Eastern Europe to the Middle East, all the way to East Asia. It is all connected to this single desire by the United States to maintain primacy over the world. So I'll keep an eye on all of this. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check out the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. In the video description below are also all the links that I referenced in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of my other social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. They're not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. To those who are helping out, whether it's once a month or one-time donations, or if you have no additional resources to spare and you're just helping share my work with others, getting the word out there, that is all greatly appreciated. That is what makes this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.